The film focuses on a man named Cade, a construction worker who that morning was gathering with his colleagues before starting their activities. One of the workers, Noel, approached Levon and gave him a lunchbox made by his wife. Noel felt that Levon had done his family a favor by giving him the opportunity to work there. Levon then motivated his colleagues, reminding them to always stay safe and stay focused on their work, because there were families waiting for them to return home. As the foreman who was responsible for all the workers there, Levon then gave a report to the owner of the construction agency, Joe Garcia, that the work that day went according to plan. Meanwhile, Jenny Garcia, Joe's daughter, vented her feelings to Levon. She said that that day she had planned a party to celebrate the end of the semester with her friends. Her father, Joe, who heard this, protested because he felt that Jenny should have appreciated her parents' efforts more by always providing for all her needs. Joe's protest was supported by his wife, Carla Garcia, especially because the cost of the party Jenny planned was not small. However, even so, Joe still supported his daughter's wishes. He finally gave his credit card to Jenny, but with a reasonable spending limit. Levon, who witnessed the conversation, could only smile. However, his attention was immediately diverted when he saw a group of debt collectors coming to the construction area. Levon approached them when he saw them trying to beat Noel. Levon initially asked the thugs not to make a scene in the construction area, but they ignored him. This made Levon angry, and without hesitation, he beat them all mercilessly. Seeing Levon being able to defeat the thugs easily, Noel began to wonder who Levon really was. However, Levon chose not to answer, and only asked Noel to get back to work immediately. Shortly after the incident, Jenny met Levon and brought him lunch, because the Garcia family knew that Levon only brought canned tuna and peanut butter every day. Jenny then asked about the incident that had just happened. She did not expect that Levon had the fighting ability of a trained military man. However, Levon just responded casually, saying that it was nothing out of the ordinary, and asked Jenny to keep quiet so that this incident would not become a topic of conversation. Jenny understood and promised to keep it a secret. After finishing work, Levon stopped by a house where his daughter Mary lived with her maternal grandfather. When she saw her father coming, Mary was very happy, but not Roth, the grandfather, who had not liked Levon from the start. Levon and Roth's relationship had never been good since Mary's mother died. Roth always tried to get full custody of his granddaughter, even though legally he was only her maternal grandfather. In fact, on the day Levon visited, Roth deliberately held Mary's birthday party at home so that Levon could not take his daughter away. Levon actually wanted to beat up Roth, but he realized that that was what the old man wanted, to be able to use the incident as an excuse in court that Levon only relied on violence to solve problems. If that happened, Roth could further strengthen his claim to get full custody of Mary. Instead of being provoked, Levon chose to leave, leaving Roth with his own anger. Moreover, Mary was already waiting for him in the car because she preferred to go with her father rather than stay at her grandfather's house. Arriving at a simple restaurant, Levon gave Mary a gift, a photo of her mother when she was little with him. Mary was very happy to receive the photo, but at the same time, sadness was also evident on her face. She felt that her mother had left them both just like that. Hearing that, Levon said that her feelings of sadness were natural. In fact, he himself felt the same way when his wife died so quickly, leaving them both behind. After eating with his daughter, Levon met his lawyer, David, to tell him what happened to him, how Roth deliberately held Mary's birthday party on the day of his visit, as if to provoke Levon's emotions so that he would act violently. David then told Levon that Roth's lawyer seemed to have filed an additional letter to the court, accusing Levon of suffering from PTSD or post-war mental trauma disorder due to his military service. The accusation stated that his illness could lead to violent actions at any time. Because of that, they asked that Levon's visits be supervised, even reducing his visiting time from 2 hours a week to only 1 hour. Hearing that, Levon felt very angry. How could his service to his country be an excuse to make him a bad guy? Levon then gave David an additional $10,000 from his savings to help him fight Roth's lawyer. He then told him that Roth probably hated him because of the death of his daughter. Roth blamed Levon for the death, even though his wife had committed suicide. At the time of the incident, Levon was on assignment overseas, while his wife had been struggling with depression for a long time. Hearing this story, David finally understood the reason for Roth's hatred for Levon. However, he still doubted whether he could help Levon to the fullest. Levon used his savings for legal fees, even though he had to live in his car. In fact, the court would definitely consider the factor of housing eligibility in the custody decision. However, Levon did not care about that. For him, the most important thing was that David could help him, even though he had to spend a lot of money to win his child custody lawsuit. At David's suggestion, Levon began looking for a temporary place to live so that he could fulfill one of the requirements in the trial against Roth. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jenny and her friends were at a nightclub to celebrate the end of college party. They enjoyed the night dancing and drinking together, unaware that there was a group of people watching them from a distance with evil intentions. After having fun on the dance floor, they moved to a bar to relax. Although Jenny still looked fine after drinking a lot, one of her friends felt nauseous and rushed to the toilet to vomit. Jenny accompanied her. Seeing her friend in a mess, Jenny took the initiative to go back to their table to get her makeup. However, as soon as she came out of the toilet, a man named Viper kidnapped her. Levon was shocked by the news of Jenny's disappearance. Since Friday night after going out partying, Joe finally contacted the police. However, according to the police, if there was no news within 5 days, then they would take action. Joe and his wife asked for help from their extended family, including their cousin who was a police captain. Unfortunately, because this incident happened outside his area of duty, he couldn't do much. In an increasingly urgent situation, their only hope was Levon. They believed that if anyone could find Jenny, it was Levon. As a form of appreciation, Joe offered Levon $50,000 plus another $20,000 as a token of gratitude. However, Levon refused the offer. For him, he was no longer the person he used to be. Levon then went to a remote place, deep in the forest, to meet an old friend, Gunny Lefferty. When he found out that Levon had come, Gunny was very happy. Although he was now almost 90% blind, he never considered his blindness a weakness. With his military training and experience, he was still able to adapt. Gunny immediately asked what Levon's purpose was in meeting him. He knew for sure that Levon had come for a reason. He gave advice. If Levon wanted to act like he used to, then he had to do it wholeheartedly, without hesitation. The next day, Levon met Joe at his residence to see how he was doing. Joe still looked very sad because Jenny had not returned home. Levon asked Joe to get up, and he reminisced about the past. When his wife died, Levon himself decided to retire from the military, a decision that disappointed many people and made him shunned. However, Joe, Carla, and Jenny always cared about him, so he considered them his family. Because of that, Levon promised to bring Jenny back home. Levon began his hunt from Skip's bar, the last place Jenny was seen before she disappeared. He began to monitor the activities of the bar owner, a man named Johnny. To monitor Johnny's movements, Levon installed a GPS tracking device on his car. Not long after, Levon came to Johnny's house and immediately pointed a long-barreled rifle at him. Surprised by Levon's arrival, Johnny asked who he was and how dare he enter his house with a weapon. Levon explained that he came to look for a girl who disappeared at his bar. Johnny casually said that he had given the same answer to the police, so there was no reason to answer Levon's questions. However, Levon was not interested in that answer. He was sure that Johnny was involved in Jenny's disappearance. Without saying much, Levon covered Johnny's face with a wet towel, forcing him to reveal the truth. Unable to stand the torture, Johnny finally spoke. Johnny revealed that the people he was looking for were on a different level. They were very dangerous. If he spoke further, the lives of his entire family were in danger. However, before Levon could get more information, Johnny suddenly screamed after hearing some of his colleagues coming. After killing the three people, Levon tried to find clues by looking at the tattoos on their bodies. Levon realized that he was dealing with the Russian Mafia. At the place where Jenny was held, Jenny's condition seemed to be still fine. Meanwhile, Levon was seen outside Johnny's house, watching people who would come after hearing the news that Johnny and his colleagues died in his house. His guess was right. Not long after that, Wolo Kolisnik came with two of his subordinates, Danya Karchenko and Vanko Karchenko. They entered Johnny's house to see the conditions there, but what they found was a bitter reality. They found that the $90,000 was gone, along with the lives of Johnny and his two colleagues. Actually, they did not believe that anyone would dare to rob the money. However, after seeing the reality, they could only wonder who the person was who dared to disturb their group. The Karchenko brothers then called their regular cleaner, who usually cleaned up the traces of their murders. But now they were cleaning up the murders committed by other people against their members. Shortly after that, the three of them left Johnny's house, followed by Levon, who was following them from behind. From a distance, Levon watched Wolo's house using a thermal camera to see who was inside. At that time, Wolo was only with his wife. However, there was a small argument between them, until his wife chose to leave. Seeing the opportunity, Levon immediately sneaked in and held Wolo hostage. With his body tied to a chair, Wolo continued to try to threaten Levon and asked if he knew who he was facing. Arrogantly, Wolo called himself one of the leaders of Barry Jaconi, the most feared Russian gangster in mainland England. However, that statement did not deter Levon at all. He had often faced such Russian gangsters while serving in the military. Levon emphasized that he did not care about Wolo's money or dirty business. His only goal is to find a missing girl in the place where Wolo runs his dirty business. Levon's words make Wolo very angry. He immediately accuses Dimi Kolisnik, his own son, as the mastermind behind this problem. Wolo even curses his son with curses, upset because Dimi's actions make him have to take responsibility. Levon recorded Wolo's conversation in Russian. After successfully getting information from Wolo, he now has one new name to look for, Dimi. Wolo's death makes Simon Karchenko unable to stay silent. However, he is still confused about the purpose of Wolo's killer because it is clear that the motive is not money. For Simon, Wolo is an honorable person, unlike his son, Dimi, who is not interested in the family business. Dimi prefers to live a wild life rather than work hard, something that has always hurt his father's feelings. Simon then orders his two sons to immediately find Wolo's killer so that they can take revenge. Meanwhile, at the place where Jenny is being held, Artemis comes to bring her food so that she remains in good condition before she is handed over to the client. Jenny goes berserk, but Artemis only holds a knife to her neck, making her not dare to say a word. Elsewhere, Levon contacts his colleague in the police, Andre, to find information about Dimi and his possible involvement with the Russian criminal network in the city. Andre suspects that Dimi might be involved in human trafficking, but he can't promise Levon much help because the case is too dangerous. However, he gives one clue, a bar called Hattie's, where Russian gangsters usually get drugs. That's where Levon might be able to find information about Demi. The night passes and Levon arrives at Hattie's bar to find information about Demi. Meanwhile, in the bar's CCTV surveillance room, Artemis, the man who kidnapped Jenny, is approached by Scott, who wants to know why Artemis has been busy in the past few days. However, Artemis doesn't want Scott to interfere. He insists that his business is not something Scott needs to interfere with. Artemis then points to someone at the bar and asks Scott if he knows who the man is, because Artemis has never seen him before. Artemis suspects that the person is a police officer. Through the bar's sophisticated CCTV system, he sees Levon carrying a .38 caliber pistol tucked into his pants pocket. Without wasting any time, he immediately orders Scott to approach Levon. Scott then approached Levon, but Levon, who realized that the man beside him was an important person in the bar, immediately showed the money he was carrying. He hoped to get something he wanted. Levon was then introduced to Dutch, the leader of a motorcycle gang operating in the bar, and also an intermediary for the distribution of blue glass drugs. Dutch looked at Levon suspiciously and asked, "Are you a police officer?" Because according to him, a police officer must know the prohibitions that apply in this place. Levon firmly said that he was not a police officer, but Dutch did not easily believe it. He then ordered his men to search Levon's pockets. One of his men almost died in a small fight. Dutch immediately stopped the fight and apologized for his excessive actions. He saw Levon's rough palms and believed that the man in front of him was a hard worker. However, Dutch also knew that Levon was no ordinary person. Seeing how he fought, Dutch suspected that Levon had a dangerous past. Dutch then asked what Levon really wanted. Levon replied that he wanted to buy blue glass drugs in large quantities. When Dutch asked why he chose to transact with him, Levon explained that his contact in Chicago was no longer reachable. Without further ado, Levon asserted that he did not want to negotiate too long because time was money. After considering Levon's offer, Dutch finally agreed. He asked Levon to come to a diner at the intersection of the Highway North tomorrow morning to pick up his goods. The next day, Levon arrived at the agreed place and met with Artemis and Scott for the drug transaction. However, instead of handing over the goods directly, the two of them only gave Levon a cell phone. Not long after that, Levon received a call from Dutch via the cell phone. Dutch told him that the blue glass drugs he was looking for were under his car seat. He also asked Levon to keep the cell phone because he would contact him in the near future to arrange a large shipment. Levon was happy because his plan worked. This meant he was one step closer to finding Jenny. Meanwhile, Viper and Artemis took Jenny to a place to meet Nestor, a billionaire who was the buyer of the women they kidnapped. Jenny, who was still conscious, seemed to be struggling. So before handing her over, they drugged her first so that she wouldn't fight back. During the transaction, Nestor received a suitcase containing Jenny, and in return, he handed over a suitcase containing gold and cash to Demi, the boss of Viper and Artemis. As a regular customer, Nestor was very satisfied with Demi's service, who always provided high-quality goods for him. When Nestor intended to check Jenny's condition in the suitcase, Jenny suddenly came to. Without hesitation, she immediately bit Nestor's left face, making blood flow profusely until it soaked his clothes. Meanwhile, Levon, who was still busy searching, received a call from Dutch. Dutch asked if Levon's people liked the goods he gave, because if they were satisfied, Levon could continue the blue glass drug transaction to the next stage. However, Dutch warned Levon that this time he had to dress more neatly because the people he was going to meet had enormous power. In fact, they could buy power for their own interests. The next day, Levon arrived at a fancy restaurant to meet Dutch and a man named Demi Kolisnik, the person Levon had been looking for. To avoid suspicion and disguise his identity, Levon used the pseudonym William Coach. He was aware that these people would definitely investigate his background before proceeding with the transaction. After waiting for a while and making sure that Levon was not a threat, Demi finally handed him the blue glass narcotics. Demi also gave instructions that if Levon wanted additional supplies, he only needed to send a rabbit emoji as a code. Just like before, Levon threw away the narcotics because his goal was not business, but to find Jenny. Feeling that he still had not found any clarity about Jenny's whereabouts, Levon began to open Jenny's social media. There he found a man who always appeared behind Jenny and her friends in their photos. This man's presence seemed very suspicious. Levon then opened Johnny's cell phone that he brought and began to search for a connection between the man and Johnny. From his search, Levon found that the man had a connection with Hattie's bar. Not wanting to waste time, Levon immediately monitored the activities at Hattie's bar from outside. However, his movements were detected by Artemis through the bar's CCTV surveillance. He immediately called the Karchenko brothers, telling them that the person they were looking for was outside the bar. Realizing that he had been detected, Levon immediately tried to escape by stealing one of the motorbikes parked in the yard of Hattie's bar. Before Levon managed to escape, several shots hit his motorbike, causing Levon to be thrown and hit a police car that happened to be there. Levon initially thought that the police would help him. However, he soon realized that the police were corrupt police who were working with Russian gangsters. The Karchenko brothers finally caught Levon and began interrogating him. They asked Levon if he didn't feel guilty for the people he had killed and how he knew Demi as his business partner. Not satisfied with Levon's answer, they tried to torture him until he died. However, even though he was tied up, Levon still fought with all his might, not giving them a chance to win easily. Levon sank the van into the river, ending the lives of the Karchenko brothers. News of their deaths finally reached Simon, who was immediately filled with great anger. His two sons had to die horribly, and he swore to avenge their deaths, even if he had to face the devil. Meanwhile, Viper and Artemis met Demi, who looked very angry. Demi questioned how his client could have stitches on his left cheek. He had built this business for a long time to satisfy customers, but one thing he could not accept was breaking a promise to his clients. Demi had just lost $200,000 due to Viper's mistake, and he demanded that they fix this mess immediately before his patience ran out. Simon then met with the gangster leaders to discuss the actions of a demon who had killed two assassins and his boss. Moreover, the two assassins were his beloved sons. He asked for the support of the Russian gangster leaders to take revenge. One of the gangster leaders, Yuri, asked Simone where Dimi was because he might know something about the devil. Yuri also suggested that Simone bring two of his best hitmen to help him track down Dimi and the person who killed their members. Dimi, who was inside the club, seemed surprised to see Simone there, especially after learning that his father and Simone's two sons had been killed by the person he was doing business with. Dimi immediately explained that he knew nothing about the man. According to him, the man came to him and met for only 5 minutes. However, Dimi still had the ID card that he had checked before the drug transaction, and he handed it to Simon. After successfully hacking the government data system, they found out his family's details. Two hitmen came to Roth's house, Levon's in-laws, with the aim of warning Levon that he had chosen the wrong enemy. At the same time, Levon, who was on his way, received a call from the school. They informed him that his daughter had not been picked up by her grandfather, making Levon immediately realize that something was wrong. Hearing the news, Levon immediately went to the school to pick up his daughter. However, he wondered why Roth had not picked up Mary as he should. Mary explained that she had tried to contact her grandfather many times, but there was no response, either via text or phone. Realizing this, Levon began to suspect that Russian gangsters had something to do with the disappearance of his father-in-law. He suspected that they wanted to harm those closest to him. Levon's suspicions turned out to be correct. Roth's house was seen burning, and inside, Roth was tied up with bruises all over his body. After successfully saving him, Roth looked at Levon questioningly. "Who are these people?" Levon replied that they were the Russian Mafia. Roth was angry and said that if Levon had not looked for trouble, he would not have been dragged into all this. Mary, who saw her grandfather blaming her father, immediately defended Levon. "Grandpa should thank Dad. He could have left you there, but he still chose to save you." Levon apologized to Roth and asked him to go to the hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, Levon decided to take Mary away from the city to a safer place until all this was over. Long story short, they finally arrived at Gunny's residence. While Mary was inside the house with Gunny's wife, Levon talked to Gunny outside. Gunny wanted to know what was really going on and whether Levon had found the girl he was looking for. Levon explained that the people he was facing were the Russian Mafia, who had a large network in this city. Because of that, it took him longer to find Jenny. Gunny understood Levon's situation and decided to give him some equipment that might help him in his search. He took Levon to his personal warehouse where he kept various collections of weapons. Among all the weapons, Levon chose a long-barreled rifle, a weapon he had used while serving in the military. Before leaving, Levon told his daughter to stay with Gunny until he returned. Mary nodded, and Levon set off to face the Russian gangsters. On the other hand, Viper and Artemis are on their way to a place to kill Jenny, who has caused trouble for them. However, on the way, Jenny suddenly rebels, and in the chaos, she manages to escape from their captivity. She continues to run in the dark forest until she finally meets a policeman who is passing by. Jenny immediately asks for help from the police, but without her realizing it, the policeman is part of a Russian gangster. Instead of saving Jenny, the policeman takes her back to Viper and Artemis. Now, in the middle of the wilderness, Viper and Artemis prepare to kill Jenny. However, suddenly a phone call from Nestor stops them. Nestor orders them not to kill Jenny, but to take her to the farmhouse. Meanwhile, Dimi was in his hideout, accompanied by a female entertainer and guarded by trained troops. Unbeknownst to them, Levon had infiltrated the place and began to disable the guards one by one. captured Demi to get information about Jenny's whereabouts. Seeing Levon, Demi was curious and asked, "Why are you working so hard, to the point of killing so many people just for a woman?" Levon replied with a sharp gaze, "I promised her that I would always support her. If she is in danger, then it is my duty to help her." Hearing this answer, Demi only smiled faintly and begged Levon not to kill him. In exchange, he would give him the address where Jenny was hidden. However, Demi added, "I will not only give you the address, I will take you there myself." After arriving at the intended location, Levon immediately asked Demi, "Why are you doing all this? Why did you have to kidnap Jenny?" Demi then explained that Viper's job was to take photos of the girls in the nightclub. The photos were then sent to him, and he handed them over to certain clients. Finally, those clients were the ones who chose which girl they wanted. Hearing this explanation, Levon felt very angry. For him, the people they kidnapped were human beings, not goods that could be traded. He then looked at Demi sharply and asked, "Do you have a daughter? If not, then you will never understand what I'm talking about." Meanwhile, at Hattie's bar, Dutch received news that the person he was working with had slaughtered half a dozen Russians. Now the person was on his way to the farmhouse. Hearing the report, Dutch became very angry and immediately ordered all his men to move to the farmhouse and finish off Levon. On the other hand, Levon had infiltrated the farmhouse looking for Jenny, who was being held captive inside. At that time, Nestor was in a former operating room, preparing to kill Jenny slowly, as retribution for her past actions. However, when Nestor was about to start his operation, a grenade exploded in the room, stopping all his plans. Dutch and his men arrived at the scene. However, Levon managed to kill Dutch and all his men. After that, he entered the farmhouse to look for Jenny. In the midst of the chaos, a shot hit Nestor's body, sending him flying. Meanwhile, Viper, who had only been good at talking, turned out to have no courage to fight. Levon easily killed him. Meanwhile, Artemis died from Jenny's leg lock. At the same time, Simone's two best assassins had arrived at the scene to hunt Levon. They acted brutally, even shooting at the police who had just arrived at the scene. However, Levon was undefeated. Levon managed to free Jenny, but his escape was blocked by Carpet Victor. However, Levon's experience as a former Marine could not be underestimated, as he easily finished off both of them. Finally, Levon and Jenny managed to escape from the location using a motorbike belonging to the gang he had slaughtered. From a distance, Simon could only watch the enemy who had killed his sons leave, without being able to do anything. Simon immediately called Yuri for help and told him that Levon had managed to escape with Jenny. However, this time Yuri gave a different answer. He asked Simon to forget his personal grudge in order to maintain the integrity of the group. Yuri said that a devil like Levon would be difficult to conquer, especially since Levon had gotten what he wanted. Yuri was sure that Levon would not cause any more trouble. Simon could only accept the reality with anger. Levon finally managed to bring Jenny home. Upon arriving home, Jenny's parents and her entire family greeted her with tears of joy. Carla and Joe did not forget to express their deepest gratitude to Levon for bringing Jenny home safely. Before the film ends, Levon returns to Gunny's house, where his daughter has been taking shelter. Mary, who sees her father return, immediately runs to him happily. Seeing Levon return safely, Gunny smiles in relief. That's the end of the story. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the latest cinema storylines and other interesting stories. Thank you for watching this film summary. Hopefully you all are entertained. See you. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share for more exciting videos like this. Thank you.